Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome virtually to this final session of this conference series. It's a pleasure to see all of you in a virtual sense this afternoon. So my name is Andrew Ray. I'm Professor of Engineering at the University of the Highlands and Islands, and I'm your host for this afternoon's session. So what I'd like to do first is just give a bit of background information, an introduction, if I may. So to those of you who've not been part of any of the previous events as part of this series, I'll give a brief introduction to that and then explain what's going to happen this afternoon. So the network, over the years, the strong educational and research links have been established between Scotland and the Arctic, and the scope of the Arctic research in Scotland extends beyond natural and physical sciences to the humanities and social sciences with politics, law, environment, energy, development and economics gaining increasing prominence in recent years. Yet despite the many research strengths of the Scotland-based institutions, much of the Scottish research community remains fragmented. So this series of network events aims to lay the foundation for consolidating Scottish expertise on Arctic matters and building a network for more consistent involvement of Scottish institutions in Arctic research and international forums. So as I mentioned, this is the last of a series of 9 themed network events, and the series will conclude with 2 consolidation events on the 15th and 17th of March from midday to 1:30 to reflect on the discussions and begin the initial steps of establishing a Scotland-wide network dedicated to Arctic research. So this afternoon we were due to have 4 speakers. Sadly, Lisa McKenzie from EMEC has had to drop out due to illness. So we have our 3 speakers with us this afternoon. So I'll do a quick bit of introduction to myself, and then I'll introduce each of the speakers in turn, who will give short presentations, and then we'll have about half an hour of facilitated discussion, which Senan will facilitate for us. The chap who's been sending you out all these emails to remind you that today's happening, and has been a real help in helping support all the work that goes on in the background to make these events a success. So with 1 speaker short, we'll still aim to finish around 3:15, 3:30. So as I said, my name's Andrew Ray. I'm Professor of Engineering at the University of the Highlands and Islands. I'm a relatively new academic. I've only been in academia for 10 years. And previous to that, I spent 20 years in industry. And my background is aircraft and racing car design. But one of my interests is applying the techniques we use to design complex systems like a racing car or an aeroplane to new applications, including specifically for this event, renewable energy. So the university has a collaboration through the Interreg programme with Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland called the Bryden Centre, looking at various aspects of renewable energy. And I have 2 PhD students in there looking at applying engineering optimization processes to tidal and wave energy devices, for example. So it's taking the ability to model an entire system, whether that system is a nut and a bolt, or it's an entire wave energy device, or indeed an entire energy generation and distribution network to optimize the components of that system and therefore optimize the system as a whole. So how do you get the lowest possible cost of energy from the most efficient use of the resource available? And one of those PhDs is looking at collecting together the 3 of the different constraints that we have when looking at the application of these technologies. So we have the natural resource, the wind, the wave, or the tide. We have the performance of the devices themselves. So where do you locate those devices to best take account of the resource? But then looking at the socio-economic impacts of those choices. So for example, if we're citing a wave device, what effect does it have on the seabed due to anchoring? How best to route the cable from the device to an onshore station, and looking at the grey areas of there, so looking at both geography, geology, the flora and fauna, looking and understanding at the cost of the impacts of each of those. So if we have to go through a kelp bed, for example, what is the cost of relocating any protected species against the cost of going around that area? So I think that's more than enough for me. Really looking forward to our speakers this afternoon. And the first one, I have had the pleasure of working with on a number of occasions on a project that currently looking at the impact of sustainable aviation in remote and rural areas. So Magnus Davidson is a research associate with the University of the Highlands and Islands Environmental Research Institute based in Thurso on the north coast of the mainland. His work focuses on researching the interactions between the environment, economy and society in the context of wider sustainability issues. One strand of his research is focused on renewable energy development in Highlands and Islands region, and he's worked across a number of Northern Periphery and Arctic Programme projects looking at energy issues with Arctic partners. He has been involved in Arctic policy development within the university, as well as co-authoring the Scottish Government Arctic Policy Mapping Report, which was used to aid in the development of Arctic Connections, Scotland's Arctic Policy Framework. So, Magnus, thanks very much for joining us, and over to you.
Thank you, Andrew. Bear with me while I just share my screen. Here we go, because I have nothing going at the when I'm sharing my screen. Also, would just like to wish everybody a very happy International Women's Day, 8th of March. I think it's an excellent day to be celebrating. Today, I'm going to kind of quickly run through some issues related to renewable energy generation in the Highlands and Islands of Scotland. Not least because it's really the area that interests me most, but I think a regional approach to a lot of the discussion around the Arctic is very beneficial. So, here in the Highlands and Islands, why am I choosing this region other than it's just what interests me and it's where my academic partner works? Scotland is obviously known as a world leader in renewable energy. However, a lot of the generation is actually found in the Highlands and Islands. Highlands and Islands of Scotland are Scotland's renewable powerhouse. A lot of generation from onshore wind, a lot of generation from hydropower, increasing the amounts of offshore wind generation, and from the nascent marine renewable sector, both wave and tidal. The region generates a lot more electricity than it consumes, so over 300% of consumption from renewable sources. When you look at individual local authority areas within the region, it can increase even more than that, for example. Highland produces around 25% of Scotland's renewable electricity, well more than any other local authority area. So we are a net exporter to the rest of Scotland. We share many of the same challenges as our Arctic neighbours around sparsity of population. We have remote communities, rural communities, and we also deal with some of the same issues around core periphery dynamics. So we are a successful energy region with similar socioeconomic challenges. So it's a nice, very nice region to look at and seeing how we can share our lessons. So we have many success stories around renewable energy here in the Highlands and Islands, the first of which are used, I'm going to represent with the Bewley-Denny line. We are a net exporter of renewable electricity, and we effectively power Scotland, or a lot of Scotland's net zero aspirations. We are leading developers in terms of new technologies. We have wave energy in the middle here, and we also have a lot of tidal or developing tidal stream. We have the world's largest tidal stream array here in Caithness, and we are looking to export that technology across the world. We have a lot of expertise in transitioning the oil and gas sector into renewables. So on the bottom left-hand side, you can see Global Energy's big energy park, which is successfully diversifying away from oil and gas into renewables, offshore wind, marine, and other renewable sectors. We also have an incredibly successful community energy sector. So for example, we have Egg Electric here, but we have a lot of community energy projects and a lot of community energy expertise that we could hopefully share with our Arctic neighbours. I've stolen this slide from another presentation, which Andrew actually alluded to earlier. And this is a fantastic example of how I think that we could, or a fantastic example of research project that I think we could export elsewhere, our Arctic neighbours could learn. This is looking at using the renewable resources within the Highlands and Islands to deal with one of the main socioeconomic issues that we have, the challenges that we have, and that is looking at transport. How do we make our transport in the region net zero, particularly around aviation, which is a lifeline service, certainly not a luxury. So this is pulling together an expert partnership of academia, business, local authority partners, all found within the region, as well as pulling in some expertise from out with the region to help turn that renewable energy resource into a solution for our transport challenge. We also have some, what I would call challenges, some might call failures, some challenges that the Arctic, I think, could learn from us around renewables. The first of which, that despite being a large net electricity exporter, we suffer from very high costs, which lead to high fuel poverty. Just the way that the system's set up, and we've not found a way or a solution for that yet. We also have conflict between our devolved and our reserved governments. So, for example, around energy policy. The Scottish Government's been incredibly good at working within the confines of devolution, but we do run up against some challenges, for example, here with the contracts for difference. We've also struggled at times to capitalise on the renewable resource that we've got in terms of building the companies, CS Wind, for example, going under, who produced onshore wind turbine towers. How will we continue all this work post-Brexit? So here at ERI, we've been involved in a number of Northern Periphery and Arctic programme projects looking at energy, community renewables, looking at how we deal with the impact of renewables, looking at hydrogen, for example. How do we generate hydrogen from our constrained renewable energy resources? So how will we deal with this post-Brexit? How will we continue to maintain these partnerships, looking at renewable energy resources? And how are we going to keep sharing our learning with our Arctic neighbours? So the Highlands and Islands is a successful energy region with a lot to offer the Arctic. However, there's many challenges that remain. Can our Arctic neighbours learn from our failures? How do we work on these together? How do we best share our learning? Can we capitalise on the Scottish Government's Arctic policy framework? Can we capitalise on our existing networks within the University of Arctic? How do we maintain those links between communities in a post-leader world? What can we learn from our Arctic neighbours? So the Highlands and Islands are further along the decarbonisation journey and can offer a lot of lessons around opportunities, looking at our, as an export region, looking at technology, looking at community renewables, especially around just transition. But we do have our challenges around core periphery dynamics, evolved and reserved conflict, and higher costs of energy. A lot of our learning's been facilitated via Europe. How do we look to maintain this post-Brexit? And how can we continue to leverage existing networks and Scottish Government aspiration? That's it for me, and I'm looking forward to the questions and discussion after this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Magnus. That was a very quick whistle-stop tour through a broad range of activities that you've got going on. So thank you very much for that. If you don't mind, we'll save questions until the discussion at the end. So if you can make a note of the things you want to ask Magnus, and we can revisit that when we get back to the appropriate point. So I think next on the agenda is Gizella.
Yeah.
So I'm right. So Professor Dr. Gizella Aruda has extensive experience as a principal researcher of global governance, corporate governance, business ethics, leadership, energy, sustainable business, sustainable development, and corporate social responsibility. So at Oxford Brookes University, she researches governance, environment, Arctic studies, and education, and also carries out research into higher education pedagogies and manages consultancy projects in education as a program and curriculum designer. She has been a Fellow of Higher Education Academy since 2014 and a Fellow of the Royal Geographical Society since 2015. Gizella is an experienced lecturer and presenter of workshops and international conferences and has given 10 conference keynote speeches and has over 50 referee journal articles and 30 international conference presentations. She's worked as a scientific advisor to universities, examination boards, and as a business manager and consultant in corporate social responsibility and sustainability for the oil and gas, mining, petrochemical, and pharmaceutical sectors. She's been an advisor for several governmental and non-governmental organisations, advising policymakers and elaborating reports. Additionally, she supervises PhD students as a Director of Studies and supports postgraduate learning. She's Editor-in-Chief of Energy, Arctic and Climate Change International Journal and a reviewer for Geographical Journal of Higher Education. So welcome, Gizella, and it's my privilege to welcome you to give your presentation now. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm sharing my screen. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, looks good.
Great. Okay, so, right. So it's a pleasure for me to be here sharing with you this passion. I come from the energy industry as well. This is where I started as an academic and as a professional. And I'd like to share with you today exactly some perspectives on renewable energy that comes from a research project that was carried out from 2014 until 2018 and in first phase. And this is the fruit of this research project was exactly the book Renewable Energy for the Arctic. And this book is a result of phase 1 of the project that took 5 years of field work and data collection across the Arctic region, Alaska, Canada, Norway, Greenland, and Iceland, mapping the most important renewable energy projects currently installed and under development, and showing various modalities of high technological renewable energy projects across the Arctic. The book also examines the adverse effects of fossil fuel extraction, use, environmental and social impacts of climate change, and the importance of shaping a low carbon energy system through innovation and technology. The focus is on case studies. There are several important case studies along the chapters of the book involving qualitative and quantitative research. Well, I think the first important point that we need to have in mind is exactly the energy used in the Arctic. So here we have the Arctic nations and their respective energy consumption in thousands of tons of oil equivalent. So it's a region with a very expressive energy consumption. And basically Alaska is a very important player in terms of energy consumption per capita, for example, Iceland as well. And we have this share, this trends in energy share involving different sectors like agriculture, industry, residential, transportation, and other sectors. We have these shares among the different Arctic nations. An important thing, apart from the energy consumption, energy use, energy demand that we have in the Arctic, is also to consider the importance of energy efficiency. So it's not only about producing renewable energy, but also to invest time and efforts in energy efficiency. This is something that is a very important finding from all this research developed across the Arctic. So considering the operational and social environmental impacts of oil and gas production and use. And of course, the significant climatic challenges that we have ahead, and the important targets of emissions reductions that we have also. All the implications for the Arctic cryosphere that are being felt across the Arctic by communities. So it's imperative that we shape, that we design a sustainable Arctic energy system through renewable energy production and use to secure a path to promote environmental resilience, energy self-sufficiency, energy independence, and a higher local living standards under a more decentralized system. This is the main perspective of this book that also considers the opportunities that we have. Yes, and they are enormous. There are several opportunities that we have in industry, in maritime activities, in promoting economic development through innovative energy solutions. But also we have challenges, and challenges related basically to social environmental risks that were highly discussed in previous sessions today. So it's important to provide affordable energy, an affordable energy strategy. And there are several different ways of doing that. There are case studies along the chapters of the book involving microgrid usage that I'm going to discuss in a while, hydro, wind, and solar. In Greenland, we have a very important project involving glacial meltwater power as well, and of course, the important developments of geothermal power, not only in Iceland, but in the Canadian Arctic. Other important projects, and these are explained and discussed along the chapters of this book, are exactly the developments in Svalbard related to renewable resources from nuclear modular reactor. There is a specific research that was done in Svalbard about this. It's another source of renewable energy. But my main point today is to talk about these smart grids, the energy systems, sustainable energy systems based on smart grids. So this technological and innovative renewable energy approach from pioneering renewable energy smart grids based on solar and wind resources not only have shifted energy production and use from fossil fuels to a more sustainable path, but also they provided a new horizon of durable energy access to Arctic off-grid remote communities. And we coined this terminology. We call them the low-carbon Arctic smart communities. The smart communities represent a new type of societal organization system in which its members are able to utilize a centralized type of energy, renewable energy, and cogeneration systems, and also access energy management systems, taking advantage of advanced technologies, but not only the technology, but storage, metering systems, and training to understand how to deal with these systems. So we are creating these capabilities into small communities. The smart grids in the Arctic are an extremely relevant example of social technical energy systems. And the concept of these social technical energy systems consists of how technologies and social responses evolve together and how their co-evolution affects planning and energy policies, and of course, the well-being of these communities. It also implies how the dynamics of new energy systems and associated social responses affect local systems of energy infrastructure, built environments, and their residents in dealing with these co-evolving technical and social dynamics. So we are talking about these joint technological advancements and also these social systems that co-evolve, that evolve together. So it brings a new perspective that is associated to this decentralization of electricity systems as a core component that I had the pleasure to study in Alaska and in Canada. When I collected data there, and I studied in depth the Alaskan Smart Grid Energy projects. So basically, in order to finish my presentation, I would say that there are challenges in these new technologies, in this new approach. And this is the stabilization of the system, the efficiency, as I mentioned previously, and the integration of the Arctic renewable energy smart grids. So these are important challenges that we are still working on. And we, of course, we need the partnerships to expand the study in terms of these challenges, but also to turn them into opportunities. But I think that the biggest point here, the biggest perspective, the most important perspective is exactly the social technical energy systems co-evolving with smart technological solutions. And of course, taking into account the this co-management approach that is so important. So the benefits of Arctic emerging economy may be seen in the creation of economic development, but it must be part of a sustainable prosperity project of co-management with triple gain to economy, environment, and communities. This is exactly the balance that I would like to bring in terms of perspective. And finally, I would like to say that this needs to be a vision, and the development of a sustainable vision that incorporates the multicultural values of indigenous polar communities would require this democratic, collaborative format of governance and synergy inspired in co-management. Finally, just to mention, the last chapter of the book is about the important role of the Arctic in being the powerhouse of renewable energy, mainly for Europe. And the final chapter is entitled "The Case for Increased UK Nordic Electricity Interconnection and the Implications of Brexit," to show exactly the importance of the interconnections, the interlinks. And of course, this is an extraordinary opportunity for Scotland and for advancing our knowledge and our studies in terms of renewable energy and the important function of these renewable energy systems in our future, in the years ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gizella. So finally, and last but by no means least, we have Dr. Craig Peltzer. Greg is a professor in the School of Engineering, Environment and Sustainability at the University of Saskatchewan. He is the co-lead of the Fulbright Arctic Initiative 3 program. He is the co-director of a SHRC partnership grant, Community Appropriate Sustainable Energy Security, which spans 17 Indigenous and Northern communities across Canada, Alaska, Norway, and Sweden. Greg also is the lead of the Renewable Energy in Remote and Indigenous Communities flagship initiative at the University of Saskatchewan and lead of the UArctic thematic network on renewable energy. For over 30 years, he's engaged in research focused on comparative politics and policy as it relates to Indigenous relations, energy and resource development, capacity building in the North. Outside of his academic capacity, Greg is a negotiator for SaskPower, Saskatchewan's government-owned electricity utility, on a major agreement with one of Canada's largest First Nations. So thank you very much, Greg, and over to you. And maybe if you can make your presentation full screen, that would be good. Thank you. Just unmute, Greg.
Thank you.
Someone's going to do it sometime.
Thank you very kindly, Andrew. And I want to thank my dear colleagues in Scotland for organizing this very important talk or a set of presentations to share. And I deliberately chose renewable energy in the unexceptional Arctic because I think there's a tremendous amount. We often think about Arctic exceptionalism. In many ways, it's not. And there's a tremendous amount we can learn from different regions, frankly, globally. And Scotland, of course, has been a global leader in the energy field, and particularly community renewable energy projects and community energy engagement. And so I'm very excited to be part of this discussion here today, and hence the title of my topic. Now, where am I actually from? I'm from Saskatchewan, which most people often trip over trying to pronounce. It is hard to say if you're not from here, but it is very easy to draw. It's simply 4 straight lines in the western part of Canada. And weather-wise, we often talk about now kind of a 40-40-40 when it comes to renewable energy, something that can handle 40 below, 40 above, and with a 40-mile-an-hour wind, which of course is about 70 kilometers an hour, which is kind of describes our geography. Earlier this year, well, about 3 weeks ago, it was with wind chill factor, it was about minus 57, minus 58. So we do have an extreme continental climate, not unlike large parts of the circumpolar north, eastern central Siberia, for example. To put the circumpolar north into perspective, our colleagues from the University of Alaska, Fairbanks, and ourselves, the Alaska Center of Energy and Power, we actually pulled together a map. We collected data from the 8 Arctic states, and you'll see how the Arctic shares similarities, I think, with Scotland in many regards. And that is we have a central connected electricity grid across the Arctic, with the exception of the 3 mainland Nordic countries of Norway, Sweden, and Finland. But also we have regional grids, and very importantly, off-grid communities. And each one of those red dots represents off-grid communities, which creates obviously enormous challenges, but also enormous opportunities. And what we can learn collectively here has enormous impact globally. When you think about approximately 1 billion people who don't have electricity, or the other roughly 1 billion that are either electrically islanded or on weak tide grids. So the topic is not just important for the Arctic and for Scotland, but frankly, globally, the lessons that we can work on together with our research. But this transition, nevertheless, that is creating a dawn of new opportunities with clean energy. And there's a lot of great stuff happening in Scotland. Quite honestly, I peek over periodically, actually more than periodically, to see what's going on because there's tremendous opportunities. And 2 of these opportunities are really around utility scale energy projects, and then at the lower level or smaller local level at community energy projects. And I want to share a little bit what's going on in Canada, especially with Indigenous communities. In Canada, Indigenous peoples make up about 5% of the population. When in terms of over 200 off-grid communities, they make up 50% of the off-grid communities. And unlike Alaska, that which mentioned in Gizella's talk, Canada does not have any electricity utilities, generation, and customer service communities, at least as yet. But this has been happening in Alaska for over 50 years, for example, in the continental United States. But this is starting to change, and there's somewhere close to 300 now energy projects that are owned by Indigenous communities and governments, and even at the utility scale. So the Wate, bottom left-hand corner, is over a $1 billion project that's going to be owned approximately 17 communities, including 5 non-First Nation communities, which will be a transmission utility that's going to be fully owned by Indigenous communities in Northern Ontario. In my home province of Saskatchewan, First Nations Power Authority, bottom right-hand and top right-hand corner picture, there you have carve-outs up to 10 megawatts of predominantly solar, but can be inclusive of wind, of a utility scale, where they can be independent power producers selling to the government-owned utility. And this kind of thing is happening right across Canada right now, which is terribly exciting. That's the utility scale. What we clearly need more research on, and what we're starting to see in Scotland and the UK in general, is certainly pioneering, is exploring what is the value proposition for community-led energy projects. So not just energy for energy's sake, and providing electricity services that are in constant state, but what are the value-added proposition around energy? In the top left-hand corner, that's Chief Beattie from Peter Valentine Cree Nation, one of the Indigenous communities of Northern Saskatchewan, and that's ice. And right now, ice is needed for what you see in the right-hand corner, fish. But if you could, with local sourced energy, produce ice at a cheaper rate, or you use things like what Professor Ray was talking about earlier in terms of the technological innovations, what if you could use waste heat from combined heat and power biomass plants, for example, that could also be turned and transformed and utilized in producing ice? Then it becomes, the fish industry now becomes more profitable for First Nations communities. And this is part of the value proposition. What are the other economic spin-offs? The bottom left-hand corner, in terms of the dimensional lumber forest industry, that's on the very margin. Sometimes it's running, sometimes it's not. But if you harvest a single tree, the top half is not useful for dimensional lumber, just the bottom half. But imagine if you're harvesting the same tree, can shred the top half, use it for biomass, which is creating further employment in local communities and sustaining a dimensional lumber industry, both of which are renewable economic enterprises. Again, adding a value proposition. Bottom right-hand corner, food security issues, and creating, again, local ag industry through renewable energy. In this case, this is a greenhouse from Alaska, in which kids are involved in running and operating. Again, another value is promoting STEM education at the high school level in rural and remote communities. But these are some of the value propositions around community energy. And where Scotland has been actually a world leader in is actually understanding and trying to compute actually the local equivalent of GDP in terms of the full social economic impacts of community energy projects. And I think this is an area worth exploring collaboratively and certainly on a global level. So what are the challenges, though, to realizing these kind of opportunities? You know, I would suggest from the work we've done, the three big ones are certainly human capacity, which comes back to the role of higher education institutions playing, whether it's at a polytechnic level or technical schools or at university levels. Different types of education and training, of course, are required. Financial capital, that's another challenge. But when you're looking at rural communities, the potential to have an equity stake, even in utility projects, is much, much greater than when you compare to something like a multi-billion-dollar mining operation, for example. And it's scalable. So there's some great opportunities. And again, Alaska has provided some great with the Renewable Energy Fund that's actually really launched a lot of renewable energy projects there. But we're seeing the same patterns and different instruments coming into the fore in Canada. And certainly the government of Canada has made over $1 billion investment, which will increase in terms of remote communities and providing that financial capital for those early stage investments. But the third one is policy and regulatory. And the 1950s was a wonderful era in the 1960s, but that's basically where much of our electricity utility policy and regulatory regimes emerged, and changing those so that they can be more responsive to decentralized decentralized electricity generation and distribution, and production, of course, and customer service. Those kind of things need to change, and that's a big challenge right now. And when I talk to engineering developers, I used to say 50% of the challenge is technical. I typically get challenged on that and say technical challenges maybe 25%. 75% of the current challenges for expanding renewable energy lie in those first three. So what is the road ahead to addressing these challenges? I think really it's two things: collaborative and comparative cooperation around research and higher education. And the second is getting beyond Arctic exceptionalism. The Arctic is not exceptional. When you talk about electrically islanded communities, which in challenging geographical distances and climatic, whether you're in northern Scotland or the Highlands or the Islands, whether you're in Nepal, whether you're in rural Ecuador, these challenges are very, very common across. And if we can get beyond Arctic exceptionalism and learn some of the lessons that are held within Scotland, for example, we'll be much, much further ahead. So what are we doing in Saskatchewan, just to share some stories of what's going on in our neck of the woods that we think are contributing in one small way to this challenge. We right now have what we call a CASES partnership. It's a grant. It involves 4 countries across Norway, Sweden, the United States, Alaska, and Canada. We actually now have 17 northern and indigenous communities and an additional 17 public and private sector partners, including utilities and developers. So it's multi-sectoral, has multiple institutions involved, and the partners are actually indigenous and northern communities. And that's where we're trying to do the whole thing of building this together, co-creating in terms of knowledge and understanding, and sharing these lessons across the countries. Because I heard before about the cost of learning from mistakes, and this is deadly, deadly important. And that was a point that Magnus made, and I think that is that's highly valuable. Learn from each other's mistakes so we can save each other a lot of dollars and headaches. And what we're hoping to do with this project is actually build sister communities among the northern indigenous communities, building community energy planning toolkits that are appropriate for communities that are under 5,000, under 3,000. Some of our communities are only several hundred people. And if you look at most of the community energy planning, it's really targeted for much larger urban centers. That's something we want to work on. Sharing data. This is one that there's a dearth of information around utilities and what are the actual costs, the subsidies, how much energy is being used, how is it being used. And Gizella got at part of this in her slides, which I think is very helpful. And we got to drill down right down to the community level to get a better understanding. And of course, around building local capacity, both for energy projects, but also to capture the full socioeconomic value, and by and as a consequence, enhancing energy sovereignty at the local level. The other project that we have engaged is a Masters of Energy Security, launched this year. So we have students in it from Old Crow in northern Yukon, from Inuvik, from northern Saskatchewan, and so forth, Alberta, British Columbia, about half are First Nations and northern students, that we can deliver this remotely, and which is deadly important because people from these communities can't leave full-time jobs or families to relocate to take this program, this kind of training, thousands of kilometers away. So we got to beam it out. And we had planned on doing that in the first place. COVID, of course, just enhances our university's capacities to do that with distance education, and something that we need to continue. And the goal is to build this, a network of northern indigenous small community career professionals that is very practically oriented master's program, so that you can actually lead community energy planning and community energy projects at the local level. So if you have any students in Scotland, this is my advert, undergrads or professionals that would like this kind of a program, know we're open for business. Now, what does Scotland have to offer to us? And I thought I would take a few snippets around the internet, because we have actually a good database of a lot of the research going on in Scotland around community energy in particular. And just by way, one of the things I think has been remarkable in Scotland, both the vision that Scotland has around renewable energy, but actually measuring what are the socioeconomic impacts in that kind of research. There's role models for that frankly are global, not just the Arctic, and deadly important for the Arctic. Funding advice, how do you capitalize energy projects and make those economically viable? Again, I come back to this local impact, which is very important. And then there's a plug for Magnus there. He was on the news scarcely 7 hours ago, and in terms of being the youngest, but when on the new board here, or newest member and youngest member on the board. But when I looked at his picture, I'm not so convinced he's that young. But anyhow, it's now is the time to act. And this is my granddaughter, my oldest granddaughter. My son and his family live in northern Sweden in Luleå, which is also a fascinating case of where you can take northern energy and turn it into an advantage. Being on the periphery, you can be the center of innovation. And you think of the Facebook servers in Luleå, Sweden, are there because of the cooler climate, renewable energy, stable, clean energy to power those Facebook servers. So there are tremendous opportunities for places like Scotland, Northern Canada, and certainly Northern Scandinavia and Europe to connect in, as Gizella pointed out in her presentation. And then with that, I'll say thank you.
That's brilliant. Thanks very much, Greg. There's a couple of things resonated there. One of our colleagues here at the university, Frank Rennie, always complains about the use of the word remote, because it has lots of negative connotations, and it ties along that sort of exceptionalism narrative that you were talking about. To people on the Scottish Islands, London is remote. So it's just the question of what your normal is, and the challenges and opportunities that brings.
100% agree.
Okay. So I think you've massaged Magnus's ego enough there. He's world famous in Thurso. So thank you all three of our speakers. Thank you, Magnus. Thanks, Gizella. Thanks, Greg. I really appreciate that, and some fascinating snippets there. So maybe I can hand over to Senan, who's going to moderate the discussion for us.